Hey, what's going on, YouTube? Guess this is going to be our once a week update video. Seems like that's going to be our pace from now on. Hey, what's been going on? A lot going on out there as usual. I guess we'll do a situational update here. People watching at our second favorite location. I don't know why Midwest goes to the convenience store. I hang out here and watch people come out with things I can't have. But anyway, we digress. Situation normal, acceleration, confusion, very concerning events going on, as well as more par for the course, right? Biggest thing that's had me perplexed, or had me kind of trying to get an understanding of what was going on, was the Syria situation and our what some are calling abandonment of the Kurds. Others are applauding as a withdrawal of American overreach into foreign unconstitutional wars. All of the above, I guess you could say it is. But how does it make sense is what I've been trying to figure out. How does this make sense in the bigger picture of things? We have held the stance for decades that we would not allow the Iranians, the Iraqis, or the Turks to annihilate the Kurds, which they all want to do at some point. They've all had their disagreements and cross-border incursions from the Kurdish groups, and we've kind of stood in the way of that for a long, long time. Go back before the first Gulf War. But how does it make sense now? And I've been trying to just understand how, we had our falling out with Aragon, a couple years ago, where there was probably a coup supported by one of our three-letter agencies, or one agency to be unknown, that fell through. He's not been an ally of the U.S., and suddenly we acquiesce and allow him to go after a protected group, I guess you would say, with what we've held long-standing policy. Kind of doesn't make sense. And then the fact that also we've abandoned this ISIS-held territory for them to go in and basically ally with some of these factions. I don't know, it just didn't make a lot of sense. And then I kind of put it in another scope of what is really going down. And we have to remember the ultimate goal, right? So look at the ultimate goal of globalization, of one world control, one world currency, one world government, one world, unified structure, right? So that means you can't have factions, you can't have splinter groups, you can't have these individualistic countries, you can't have these breakaway republics. There can't be no Catalonia, there can't be a Kurdistan. These things aren't allowed, right? So that's, when I look at it in that perspective, Trump is following the playbook. If you want to still believe he's on the home team, that he's not fighting for the away team, you can. But when I look at it from the perspective of the ultimate goal, it kind of falls in line with accomplishing that, and eliminating these factions and these smaller groups that prevent consolidation of power is going to have to happen eventually. And having the Turks do your dirty work for you, I guess you could say, is one thing. I guess you could say that, once we back away and the Turks do this, the Iranians and the Iraqis are going to feel like they have full sway, maybe. Northern Iraq's a little bit different. It's a little bit more consolidated with the Kurds there, and they're probably much better off, but a full modern military force would still probably be able to make short work of them, relatively speaking, a year or two, depending on what the ultimate goal was. But anyway, when I look at it in that perspective, the kind of those actions make sense. And then you look at the fiscal issues, financial stuff that's going on. Ain't nothing changed. As I've said for over a year now, if QE and if the Fed does not continue to intervene, hold rates low, the stock market will not diverge above 26,000 drastically. And that means basically shooting up above 28,000 and above. And every time the Fed has kind of backed off, the markets have threw a hissy fit, and we're sitting at what, 26.5 or something, 26.8 still, year later, because they haven't fully committed to QE, even though they're doing this kind of backdoor QE, where they are gonna pump a bunch of money into the markets till January now. So the fiscal situation's still out of hand and getting worse, and nobody wants to acknowledge it. They keep trying to blame it on there's no trade deal, so things are kind of sketchy and people are uncertain, and all these other factors. But don't believe that for a minute. And then third thing that really hitting the radar today, Brexit supposedly is got a deal with the EU, but Parliament still has to approve it. So the new PM supposedly has a deal with the EU to conduct a Brexit to come October 31st. Believe it when you see it, because going back again to the original premise that the goal is one world consolidated government, to allow the Brits to do their own thing would just totally put a big, what's the word? Fly in the soup? I don't know. Fly in the ointment? It wouldn't go well. It doesn't bode well for accomplishing that, unless you have the premise that the Brits are kind of overseeing the whole thing anyway, and they're just going to make everybody else suffer while they live large. But supposedly Brexit has a deal for a trade deal of some sort with the EU, and it's got to get through Parliament, and then they're going to be off and running. But that has to get approved and everything, and I still don't think that the powers that be are going to allow that to happen. So we'll definitely have to keep an eye on that. That's a big deal. Again, if you go with the premise that the goal is one world consolidated government, that doesn't match up with what's going on there with Brexit. So to be determined. They've dragged their feet for over a year now. So what's going to stop them from dragging their feet for another year? The Catalonia protests with Spain have picked up business out there in Barcelona with they convicted and sentenced to jail terms a bunch of the leaders of Catalonia, and there's been a bunch of protests. Some of the hype in the news media has been interesting because they've been violence outbreaks, and you look at the protests like, I wouldn't call, there's a few fires started. I wouldn't call it a bunch of violence. It's not like Baltimore or St. Louis. It's not been anything close to as bad as some of the riots that we've seen, some of the incidents we've had here. They've been mild-mannered in comparison. And unfortunately for the Catalonians, Antifa is trying to insert themselves into that and just kind of discredit the whole thing, which is what they tend to do. So just lots of interesting stuff continuing to keep an eye on and try to make sense of. Look at everybody's trying to distract from the bigger problems fiscally and financially, and ignore the problems we have here by focusing on things that are going on other places, it seems like. So y'all be good, YouTube. We'll talk at y'all later. I didn't see anybody come out with anything fancy while I was sitting here, so if you just saw it, just broke out tonight. Basically, there's warfare in the streets in a city in Mexico. They arrested El Chapo's son, and the cartel just went hog wild and are basically street to street fighting with the Mexican military in this Mexican town. I saw some of it on Twitter. Tactical Tony hooked me up with a link earlier in the day, and I was like, I don't know what this is. It's on Espanol, no habla. And then I found it on Twitter. So, okay, they arrested the cartel son. So They're not happy about that. Full on guys driving around in a Ma Deuce in a technical vehicle. Got everybody's eyebrows raised. People on tour are like, well, where'd they get this stuff? Well, you can get a 50 cal pretty much anywhere. People that comment on, people like all the gun control people are like, oh, look, this is proof that American gun laws are destroying Mexico. He's got a, M250 cal. You can only get that in the United States. Little they realize the Ma Deuce is a 100-year-old platform, and who knows how old the one they had was, and who knows how many different militaries have been issued and bought the thing from the U.S. in the last 100 years. It's not like they just came up to America, bought it, and drove back to Mexico with it. Could have came from anywhere. But not people always looking for a leverage to hype their issue and their cause for the day. But we'll get out of here, YouTube. See if anybody brings out anything for me to play with. We'll talk at you later. Prep hard, live free.